How's it going, everybody? Welcome to the Apples and Genos Fantasy Hockey Podcast. My name is Josh Hutchinson. I've got my boy John Binko with me here today. How you doing, John?
I am phenomenal, and I've had too much caffeine, so we are in the mode.
Yeah, this is our second podcast of the day that we're recording. We're doing we're putting some into the bank, so
That's right.
we're hyped up right now. Hopefully we can keep the energy going for this one. We're gonna try and not make this one
Definitely.
as long as the last one. It was a bit of a marathon, so we'll try and keep it a little more concise. So before we get into it, though, got to ask you another pressing question here, Binksy.
Uh-oh.
Who would you want to play you in a movie about your life? What do you think?
Definitely Justin Timberlake. When I was young and attractive and I had full hair, I got a lot of comparisons to him, especially in those like fedora years. And
Nice.
yes, I can rock a fedora, or at least I could when I was young and spry. And he can dance, he can sing. The ladies love him. And he looks, somewhat like generic white guy number 3 that I am. So definitely JT, the Tennessee kid.
Were you a curly hair boy?
No. Well,
Oh,
when I was like really little, sort of, but no,
okay.
I've had straight hair my whole life.
Gotcha. For me, it's John Krasinski. I think we have a similar vibe. I mean, he's a tall guy in Hollywood. I'm 6'3". He's got a prominent nose. I also have a very prominent nose. It's definitely a larger than average nose. And yeah, just a very similar vibe. I think he can be really laid back and relaxed, and also be like a little eccentric and crazy and goofy. And that's just kind of my vibe. So I feel like John Krasinski is the guy that I think would most accurately play me in a movie. Although I am sure that he would never take a role like that.
No, he definitely would. And
No.
I got to say, I forget this all the time. I'm sure the listeners do too. I'm really glad that you remind us that you're 6'3". I like feeling better around tall people. My family's tall. My dad's super tall. My brothers are tall. I'm like a little bit better than average height. So I like being on team tall guy. So make sure you remind the
Awesome.
viewers every 40 to 45 seconds that you're 6'3". Okay.
I'll try and remember that. If you need any other reminders, just take a look at the pictures of the Apples and Genos meetup. I look like a fucking monster in that picture. It's I
Yeah,
remember I looked at
you're
Nate and I
hanging
was
out with
just like,
little
oh my
guys.
god.
You're hanging out
Yeah.
with little guys.
Yeah. Jeez. All right. So we got a lot to get through today.
We're gonna get to biz.
We're gonna get to biz, baby. What are you doing, Big C? We're gonna take a look. We're gonna take a look at the top 20 defensemen this time. We did top 25 forwards. It was pretty long. We're gonna dial it back a little bit. We're gonna do the top 20 defensemen. So top 20 defensemen based on Yahoo ADP from the 2022-23 season, how they fared, whether they're worth that kind of draft capital, and what we should expect from them next year. The end of season rankings were created using Cupful scoring. So once again, that's goals were worth 4.5 points, assists 3, shorthanded points 1, shots on goal 0.5, hits 0.25, and blocks 0.5. Let's start with number 1. So number 1 last year in ADP for defenseman was Cale Makar. His ADP was 5.4. His end of season rank amongst defensemen was 13th. And overall, he was 91st, and that's with all position players. He had 17 goals, which put him 6th amongst defensemen, 49 assists, which was 11th, 176 shots on goal, and 30 power play points, which was 6th. Only played 60 games, missed a ton of time. So he had a 23 goal pace, 67 assist pace, and a 90 point pace, and 241 shots on goal pace. His IPP was a little high for him. Shooting percentage pretty normal. His 5v5 on ice shooting percentage was the lowest of his career, so that's pretty crazy. I mean, pretty unsurprising actually, just because of Colorado and their lack of depth and their injury issues. He had the highest time on ice of his career at 26-22. His shots per 60 was 14th amongst defensemen. Individual Corsi 4 per 68th. Individual scoring chances 4 per 67th. His on ice and individual stats, in terms of rate stats, were pretty normal for his career. So, I mean, I'm still really high on Cale Makar. I don't think that I am 5th overall high, but I'm definitely back end of the first round high on Cale Makar for next year. He is an elite defenseman in the league, definitely a top 3. And I mean, I think could be a perennial 90-point guy, which for a defenseman is unbelievable. So what do you think of Cale Makar?
I think all of those things are always going to be true about Makar. You're slightly concerned about injuries. You expect this kind of pace. You expect him to hit massive time on ice minutes. So I think the trouble for me is that you're gonna have to overpay for Makar, and I just don't want to do it. It was a big conversation going into the draft for this season about whether he was worth it. I think he's worth it, and I am totally on board with going defense early in a draft and really getting that value over replacement, especially with Cale Makar giving you forward type numbers. But I don't think it's ever going to be me that drafts him. I think it's just too high to give up what you could possibly get in your draft to get Cale Makar. And I can't like grandstand for it. I think it's worth it, but I don't think I'll do it.
Yeah, I understand that perspective for sure. Number 2, who you got at number 2?
The tried and true Victor Hedman at number 2, the ADP 15.1. His rank among defensemen was 19th, and his overall rank 110. He had 9 goals, tied for 34th, 40 assists, tied for 20th. 185 for shots on goal with 95 hits, 136 blocks, and 14 power play points, which left him 32nd. His hit and block totals holding steady. His IPP was down 9% from last year and was the lowest since 2019. His shooting percentage was the lowest since 2011, down from 9.13 last year to 4.86 this year for shooting percentage. Lowest on-ice shooting percentage since 2016, likely due to the reduced power play time. Time on ice down nearly 1.5 minutes. His individual rate stats are all normal. His on-ice rate stats are similar to last year, but I think the overall take that we can go with Victor Hedman is that he's getting less time on ice, and he's getting less time on ice in prime position. So he, as a player, was very much the same, but his situation was kind of drastically different from his this year. And the indication that we're getting from the Lightning is that trend will continue, right? They really like what they have from their defensive core and the way that it's worked out. And they kind of protected him a bit, playing him a little bit less. But you have to wonder whether they reverse course on that, and it doesn't seem like they will. So I'm a bit concerned about Hedman, frankly.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I'm not sure where I'm drafting him this year because it seems like Sergachev has kind of emerged as their power play guy, and that's where Hedman got a lot of his points. Obviously, still has a ton of value. Like this is a significant down year for him, and he was still a top 20 defenseman. So still a guy that you're drafting definitely, but not the juggernaut that he's been in previous years. Not an 80-point guy, not even close. Although I think you will probably see some positive regression in terms of his shooting percentage and his goal totals. I don't think that'll be enough to get him into the top 10 defensemen. So definitely will be. I mean, He'll likely be quarterbacking power play too, so there's still some offensive value there, but not what there used to be for Victor Hedman. So he's really plummeting down the list. And then reduced time on ice as well. That's big. Like, he's getting older. They're trying to save him for the playoffs. I think that's part of what happened this year, as they didn't want to overuse him. I think that trend will probably continue. So I'm definitely lower on Hedman than I was at the start of last year, for sure. All right, number 3 is Adam Fox. His ADP was 17.5. His rank at the end of the season was 10th among defensemen and 74th overall. He had 12 goals, which was tied for 17th, 60 assists, which was tied for 4th, 159 shots, 125 blocks, 25 hits, 29 power play points, which is 7th. He had a similar amount of blocks as the year before, pretty steady block rates. His IPP was pretty normal for him. His shooting percentage was up a little bit. It was up to 7.55. He had a slight improvement in individual Corsi 4 per 60 and individual scoring chances 4 per 60. I think 70 to 75 points is what you should expect from Adam Fox. And I think last year he was a little bit overrated in terms of his ADP. I definitely took him pretty high, not as high as he was put here. But if you look at shot totals, doesn't shoot the puck very much, doesn't hit really at all. So that those kind of are dings against him in terms of defensemen. Still a top 10 guy, absolutely. But I think this is kind of, I don't think that he's in the cream of the crop. I think he's a tier below the defenseman at the top, like the Cale Makars, the Roman Yossi's, and another guy that we'll mention, I'm sure, at some point. I think you could put Dougie Hamilton in that conversation as well at this point. But yeah, Fox, I think, is a step below that. What do you think of Adam Fox? I know you're typically a big Adam Fox guy.
I am a Fox guy, and I really had high hopes for this season, and he actually hit those marks that I expect, right? He had an excellent season, but what was more eye-opening for me was that the Rangers core was better than expected, and it opened up a bit throughout all of their pairings. It wasn't just Fox, it wasn't just Trouba, and then whatever else was happening. So I am still a big believer in Fox, but my idea of what his ceiling is a bit lower, because I really felt like he had an excellent season and he still ended up 10th among defensemen. So I'm going to dial back those expectations of what an excellent fantasy season for him is, but not necessarily dial back what my expectations of Adam Fox are, right? Like I'm going to adjust where he should be drafted, not if he should be drafted.
All right, man, hit us with number 4.
Number 4, the innumerable Roman Josi. His ADP was 20. His rank among defensemen was 5th, and he was 47th overall, which is phenomenal. 18 goals left him tied for 4th. 41 assists put him 19th. He had 269 shots on goal. That's 2nd, with 51 hits, 146 blocks, and 24 power play points, which put him 13th. He had only 67 games played, so a 22-goal pace with 50 assists, 72 points, and 329 shots. So if he had played a full season, I mean, right up there with the top defenseman, right? Still an excellent season as it was with only 67 games played. His IPP was down from 63 to 57, which is more typical for him. His shooting percentage was down to 6.69, not so nice, from 8.19. And his on-ice shooting percentage down from 12.45 to 10.15. Pretty well expected. with Nashville kind of coming back to the mean a
Yep.
little bit. Career high individual rate stats. So even though the team dipped to where we probably should expect them to be at normally, he continued to be the player that he is. So that's reassuring in how I feel about Yossi versus how I feel about the Preds. His shots per 60 were first with 9.57. Individual Corsi for second with 19.29, and individual scoring chances for second with 7. By far the best of his career. So he's an elite goal-scoring defenseman, highest volume shooter in the league for D-men. Nashville crashed back down to reality this year, and Yossi was affected, but I don't really know how much he was affected, because if the stats were averaged, Yossi and Makar actually finished above first and second, right? So where does all of this information leave you on Yossi? Do you feel better or worse, or do you feel kind of exactly the same about Yossi going into this season as you did about this previous one?
I feel about the same. I think his numbers were definitely inflated the year before just because of Nashville being on a team shooting percentage bender. But like looking at his underlying numbers, like they're unbelievable. Like he took his game to another level. He was still ranked as the 5th best defenseman. He was still a top 50 player in the league, even though he missed 15 games this year. So that's unbelievable. His shot totals as a defenseman are unmatched. Like they're not even, no one even comes close to the way that he shoots. So that's huge for him. Gets the blocks. Like he doesn't hit a ton, but that's really the only knock against him. He's unbelievable. Roman Yossi, arguably, you could arguably take him above Makar. I still don't know that I would, just because Makar has better players to play with, especially on the power play. But Roman Yossi is legit. He's definitely legit, and I'm taking him. I mean, I don't know where I'm taking him actually. Like either like early second round, maybe. In terms of value over replacement, I think that's pretty safe for Roman Yossi.
That feels like an incredible return on value, taking him in the second round. Yeah,
for sure. All right. Number 5 is Aaron Ekblad. His ADP was 34.4. His rank was 31st among defensemen and 150th overall. So he took a huge dip this year. And that was pretty well documented. He had 14 goals, still not bad. He's tied for 10th amongst defensemen, 24 assists, 216 shots on goal, 77 hits, 80 blocks, 19 power play points, which is 18th. Only played 71 games, so he did miss some time. But even when his numbers were average, they still were not great. Like he took a massive dip this year. On ice shooting percentage was down from 12.85 to 10.10. That's a significant dip. That's almost 3% down in on ice shooting percentage. So that would explain a bit of the assist dips. Florida was super unlucky this year for most of the year. They were a really high Corsi team. Like they had a ton of shot attempts, tons of shots, and just were not converting on their chances. So it's not surprising that on ice shooting percentage is down. His IPP was down over 9% from last year, which it was 36.19. His shooting percentage was the lowest since 2020, which is 6.48, which is low for him, not low for typical defenseman, but he is kind of a perennial goal scoring defenseman. Even on a down year, he had 14 goals. So his ice time was decreased. It was down to 23-23, and it was 24-54 the previous year. And a lot of that, I think, is the emergence of Brandon Montour. As a right-handed defenseman, he had a ridiculous year. Shared time with Ekblad on the power play, so I think that was a big factor. His shots per 60 was actually up from the year before. It was 7th in the league. Individual Corsi 4/60 is the second highest of his career. He was 15th. And then his individual scoring chances 4/60 was also a career high with 4.91. And his on ice rate stats were pretty normal for him. I think he's probably going to bounce back. I know that his numbers aren't great in the playoffs either. He has struggled to stay healthy over his career, and his ADP, I think, last year was definitely a bit overrated. But I think he could be a huge value pick next year because people are way down on him. And if they have the same power play format as they had this past year, which I know in the playoffs it's been a little weird. They've been kind of mixing things up just because their power play hasn't been super successful. But I could see, like, if him and Montour are sharing the power play again, he is a very interesting value pick next year because I think people are really down on him. What do you think?
I think it's going to be a lot of talk about whether you believe in the emergence of Montour or whether you believe in the resurgence of Ekblad, right? And I'm sure we'll talk about that 100 more times before drafting season. But the value in that is going to be Ekblad, right? You're going to have to overpay for Montour and believe that he's going to continue something that he's never done before, or you're going to get a value pick out of Ekblad in that he returns to form and has a healthier season. And as we talked about with Ekblad earlier this year, to kind of paraphrase TJ from Five Hole, they're freak injuries. They're not like reoccurring, nagging, fatigue type injuries. So, and that's been true every single time with Ekblad. So just in a sentence, I am going to be hunting the value for Ekblad and not reaching for the possibility of Montour, even though I kind of believe both are kind of equally possible.
Sure. All right. Number 6, who do we got?
Number 6 is John Carlson, ADP 39, rank among defensemen 93rd. Ugh. 323 overall, 9 goals, 20 assists, 124 shots on goal with 42 hits, 87 blocks, and 12 points on the power play, which left him 38th in that regard. Only 40 games played, an 18-goal pace, 41 assist pace, and 59-point pace. All of those kind of disappointing and low for him. His IPP was lowest since 2019. It's down 9% from last year, 46.77. His shooting percentage at 7.26, right in line with career averages. His on-ice shooting percentage lowest since 2017 at 10.28. Career high in all individual rate stats. His shots per 65th, individual Corsi 4/66th, and scoring chances 4/66th. So quality stuff in underlying metrics. Highest Corsi 4/60 and scoring chances 4/60 of his career. You're noting here, still a stud. You think he'll bounce back. You say it's just bad puck luck and injury luck. I say the team is on a serious downslope. He's coming off a major injury, and I don't think it's going to return to form. But you're still buying. Tell me about it.
I'm still buying. I think the injury, the fact that the injury was it was to his face or his ear or like something like that.
Almost severed an artery in his face.
Yeah.
Like it was bad. It was really bad.
To me, I don't see that being. Well, I don't know what the lingering effects would be of an injury like that because it's the one that you see all the time. But I imagine if he's made a full recovery from that injury, he's probably going to be just fine, and just be status quo John Carlson. And in terms of, he gets a lot of points from the power play, and I don't see that changing a whole lot for the Capitals. You still got Ovechkin in that one-timer spot. And then, the rest of it doesn't really matter so much.
Okay.
I don't know. It's going to be an interesting makeup. for the Caps next year. I don't know what they're going to look like in terms of
That's
their
true.
top six forwards. But I think there may be a little bit of change coming there. But yeah, I'm still pretty high on Carlson. And leading up to that injury, like you said, his underlying numbers were amazing. Like they're really good for him. So yeah, a little bit of um, a little bit of a down year for the Capitals in general, and I think he was affected by that. But he's typically a 70-point guy, and I think I'm still probably drafting him at that level. So yeah, that's my take on Carlson.
Okay.
Number 7 is Moritz Seider. Mo, his ADP was 45.6. His rank at the end of the season was 18th among defensemen and 108th overall. So a little bit of a disappointing year for Mo Seider. He had 5 goals and 37 assists, 140 shots on goal, 207 hits, 190 blocks, 15 power play points, which had him tied for 28th among defensemen. He only ended up with 8 fewer points than last year after all the talk about him having such a dip in terms of point production all year. He kind of picked it up a little bit in the second half. Still not amazing numbers. He had 56 more hits than the previous year and 29 more blocks. So he actually took his bangs to another level, and he was already pretty elite in that regard. His IPP was down 4% from the previous year, and his shooting percentage was about the same. And that's really all the data we have on Mo Seider because this was just his second year in the league. He only his individual rate stats took a bit of a hit. His shots per 60 was 4.43, which is 85th. Individual Corsi 4 per 60, it was 88th. Individual scoring chance 4 per 60 was 150th. So not really a big shot generation player. I would be reducing expectations for him next year. I think he's still going to get the ice time. He's going to get the power play time again. You don't have Philip Hronek to battle with anymore. So, but I mean, there's Is it Edvinsson? That's the guy that the young guy that is coming up from their system. I can't. Simon Edvinsson. I think that's his
like
name.
That. Edvinsson, yeah, something like that.
Yeah, I think long term, I've heard people talking about him potentially being their power play guy, and based on the way that Mo performed in his second year, I wouldn't be surprised to see them slotting Edvinsson in there at some point. But that being said, still is a bit of offensive upside, and still is his bangs. Like if you have bangers weight in your league, he's still a great defenseman. And in a Bangers Cats league, he's still a fantastic pick. Just not nearly as high as last year. What are your thoughts on Mo Seider?
I think, long story short, for Seider and for the Red Wings, they were very much the same result this year as they were last year, right?
Yeah.
It's just how you feel about that result, right? In terms of rate stats for the team, in terms of rate stats for Seider himself, it was very much the same season. Like it was a slight downturn in micro and macro, right? You're talking about the player, about the team, but how people felt about that was drastically different than last year. So I think you're still going to have to pay a pretty high draft capital to get Seider. People are thinking he's going to, quote unquote, bounce back, right? When he had very much the same season as a whole.
Yeah.
It was a little bit up and down in terms of usage, but as exciting as he is, he's a little bit more of an all-around player than he is an offensive player. And even though you're going to get him as your power play quarterback, you don't have a lot of expectation on that, right? And
yeah,
Detroit actually lost some weapons going into this next season. They're hoping to bring in a player like DeBrincat or et cetera, right? So they clearly need some more, and I think you're still going to have to pay brand name prices for Seider. So I can't believe I'm saying this because I'm a huge Moritz Seider fan, but you're just going to have to overpay and then be disappointed in the result. I don't see like another tier of him coming, but I mean, it's possible that in the next few seasons he reaches that at a 300 game threshold, but I don't have super high hopes for him to be a different level of player next year. He's probably going to be really consistent for you in a banger format.
Yeah, I'm with you there. All right, who's at number 8?
Number 8, Quinn Hughes, the unheralded Hughes at this point. ADP 49.5. His rank among defensemen was 15th. He was 98th overall with 7 goals and 69 assists.
Nice.
That left him second. 154 shots on goal, 29 hits, 71 blocks, and 34 power play points put him tied for first. His IPP was the lowest of his career, 53-52 for that, and his shooting percentage about average at .455. His on-ice shooting percentage, 12.39, the highest of his career. His individual and on-ice rate stats are very typical. You expect 75-ish points with mostly assists. I think that's exactly what we expect from Quinn Hughes. I have turned down multiple trade offers in dynasty formats where the manager was trying to give me Quinn Hughes. I'm just not excited. There's nothing about him as a fantasy player that I'm like, please bring that on my team. I don't love it. I never have. And nothing in his game says that he's going to explode in any different facet. I think he's just like a middle of the pack defenseman with a really like eye-popping name and family relation. And maybe I'm overblowing that, but I'm just not. There's like 69 assists and number 1 for power play points, and I'm still like, meh.
Yeah. I mean, he definitely has value, but his value comes with power play points and assists. That's it. It doesn't really bring anything else. And like you said, there's not really anything that indicates that there's more there. I think this is what Quinn Hughes is. Obviously, he's still young, so he could take things to another level, but I really don't see that at this point. So a top 15 defenseman. But if depending on your league, like if you're in a points only league, obviously he's got tons of value. But outside of that, I mean, I'm not super high on him either. But I mean, at the right price, I am, but probably not where he's going to be drafted in a lot of leagues. All right, number 9 was Morgan Riley. His ADP was 53.6. His rank ended up being 52nd among defensemen and 230th overall. He had 4 goals, 37 assists, 126 shots, 70 hits, 85 blocks, 17 power play points, which was 23rd in the league. Only played 65 games, so I mean, that was a factor for sure. Injuries. His shooting percentage was low for him. It was 3.17. It's usually about 4.5. His IPP was almost identical to the last 2 years, so nothing really crazy there. His ice time went down significantly this year. It was 21:42. It's typically closer to 24 minutes. The Leafs had kind of, especially at the end of the year, a very even split in ice time with their defensemen. Like they kind of rolled things very evenly. In the playoffs, it changed a bit, and Riley really had a fantastic playoff. He was arguably one of the best players on the team in the playoffs, which I mean he should be, but he really performed well in my opinion. His shots per 60 and individual Corsi 4 per 60 were down about 1.5 each this year. So even when he was on the ice, he wasn't producing quite as much. But his scoring chances 4 per 60 were the second highest of his career at 3.87, which would have been 26th out of defensemen. His on ice rate stats were about normal for him. The ice time's definitely a concern for him going forward in terms of his fantasy value. He may bounce back with some goal scoring. Obviously, like he really struggled in that way. He's usually more of a 10 goal guy. He'll still play on power play 1. I don't see that changing. And like I said, had a really great playoff performance. So I'm not sure if that kind of carries over into next season, but he was really, really engaged in the playoffs and really performed well. So, I mean, I'm still a little more down on Morgan Riley. I don't think he's a top 10 guy anymore in terms of defensemen. But I mean, he still definitely has value. What do you think, Binksy?
I think there is value to be had. I think there might be more value considering the overall production of the season. And you know, we've seen him be successful. His role is pretty well solidified with the Leafs. Not a whole lot's going to change there. So I have literally never drafted Morgan Riley because it's always too soon for me, and I go in a different direction in that, like, let's just say top 10 level defenseman. Yeah. But I'm more likely to draft him in this coming draft because of the downturn, right? I think we can expect pretty much the same thing next season, and if there's better value in it, then I'm buying. But if you have to pay the draft capital that you did this season, then it's too rich for my blood.
Yeah, I can understand that take for sure.
Number 10, Chris Letang at an ADP of 57.4. His rank among defensemen left him 28th and 140th overall. He had 12 goals, which put him tied for 17th with 29 assists, 161 shots, 162 hits, and 108 blocks with 21 power play points, which put him, again, right in that middle teens with tied 15th. He only played 64 games. He had a 15-goal pace, 37 assists, 52-point pace. His hit and block rates near career best, so playing a little bit different of a game this season. His IPP was low for him at 42%, down almost 6% from last year. His shooting percentage was relatively typical for him at 7.45, right along with kind of league average. On-ice shooting percentage, 9.9, lowest since 2017. And the rate stats per 60, shots 27th, individual Corsi for 13th, which was a career high, and individual scoring chances for 21st, also a career high. His on-ice rate stats near the highest of his career, and you think he should bounce back if he stays healthy. I don't see it. I'm just down on the Pens, my man. I'm just down. I just don't see it. And I think maybe I'm a little bit emotionally disappointed after drafting him pretty high in a few different places, but I don't believe. And it seems like you do. You're following the rate stats.
I can understand being down on the Pens for sure, just because of age and whatnot, and just their overall performance this past year. But yeah, the underlyings look really great for Chris Letang. Obviously, he had his typical injury issues, so that's always a factor for him. It has been his whole career. But the fact that he is at this stage of his career and he's hitting career highs in scoring chances for per 60, that's pretty awesome. And is a good sign in terms of like, I don't think there's age-related decline here. I think a lot of the reason is for this down year as compared to the year before is team performance overall, which I mean, maybe that carries over into next year, who knows? And then his injuries. So that on-ice shooting percentage is crazy low for him, 9.9%. So I imagine that there will be some positive regression. Does he get back to 70 points? Probably not. But I still think he has great value. I still think he's a top 10 guy. And yeah, I'm still pretty high on Chris Letang, even if I'm not as high as I was last year. Number 11 is Devon Taves. So this is an interesting one. His ADP was 66.8. His rank at the end of the year was 24th 104th among defensemen and 131st overall. He had 7 goals, 43 assists. His assist total was tied for 13th. 165 shots, 93 hits, 138 blocks, and 7 power play points, which had him tied for 55th. His IPP was a little bit low for him, and his shooting percentage was actually the lowest of his career with 4.24%. Shots per 60 and individual Corsi 4 per 60 were both the lowest of his career, so not producing as much in terms of shots. And he had the highest hits and block rates of his career, so playing a little more physical. He was only 7 points off his career year from last year, even though it kind of felt like a down year for Devon Toews. I think this is kind of what to expect from him. Obviously, maybe you get a little bit of positive regression. His IPP was a little low, his shooting percentage a little low. So maybe you're back up around similar to where he was the previous year. But I think this is him. Bit of offensive upside, has some nice peripheral numbers, pretty decent in terms of blocks. Nothing blows you away. Like, he's a top 25 guy. He's like, I mean, his ADP was way overly inflated last year. I guess that's what I am coming away with this. Like, I think he's a guy that you like. You're picking a lot of power play quarterbacks before you're picking Devon Toews, because he's not a power play guy, but he does have fantasy value. So I don't know. What's your take on Toews?
I think he's an incredibly consistent defenseman that is going to serve you really, really well if, like we mentioned a few episodes ago, if you can get him at value and then sell high when the chatter around him is especially good, then you're getting really, really good value out of it. And if you want to hold him all season, if they, again, have an excellent playoff schedule, etc., then you're going to be fine with that. But he's a little bit out of place in this list of top 20 defensemen, right?
Definitely.
He got extra counting stats out of Makar missing a bunch of time. And even though his time on ice was consistent, even though his actual figures were very consistent, his total shot attempts were way higher and his shooting percentage was way lower. And those aren't things that you really expect from him. He is not a scoring defenseman. He was just on an offensive team in the spotlight because there wasn't really anybody else with Byram and Makar hurt a lot. So I like Devon Toews, but he's a little bit out of place in this list, and he should absolutely be drafted as such. You're not going to get value from him drafting him where you're drafting these other guys.
I'm with you there. We got at 12.
Drew Doughty and an ADP of 76.9. His rank among defensemen was 25th, and he ended up 135 overall. He had 9 goals, 43 assists, which left him tied for 13th. 145 shots, 115 hits, and 104 blocks. Very respectable totals across the line. 27 power play points left him tied for 10th. Again, very respectable total. Second highest on-ice shooting percentage of his career. His IPP a little low, but the shooting percentage just about right. Little Goldilocks there for you. Individual rate stats down considerably from last year. So a little bit of a red flag there. Corsi 4 per 60 down considerably from last year by almost 10 points. His ice time is holding steady. His hit and block rates decreased. I think that probably had to do more with the Kings being overall more successful with the puck, having the puck more, being up more. The underlying showing potential decline, you think?
Potentially. I think the fact that his individual rate stats have gone way down, his overall Corsi 4 per 60 was down pretty considerably. Even though the Kings were kind of on the high end of Corsi 4 in the league. When Doughty was on the ice, it was down quite a bit. And then the hit and block rates have gone down, but like you said, it's probably just because they had the puck a little bit more. But I think he had really high on ice shooting percentage, second highest of his career. So that would offset those number decreases. So that his point totals at the end of the year maybe don't look that out of character for Doughty. But I think there's something to watch out for here. Like there could be some age-related decline coming. That's kind of that's what I'm wondering. I don't know that that's the case. I mean, his time on ice is still the same. Like they're not taking any ice time away from him. But there are some young guys emerging. You got Sean Dursey, who has proven that he can quarterback a power play. And then you got Brant Clark coming up from the minors, and it sounds like he's going to play in the lineup this year. And that's kind of what he does as well. So you got to wonder if Doughty, with a bit of age-related decline potentially coming, and then these guys emerging, if he starts losing a little bit of ice time, maybe a little bit of power play time, and then is not quite as valuable in fantasy. So definitely something to look out for next year. But yeah, I mean, I'm not entirely sold that is what's happening, but there are some red flags for sure. Rasmus Dahlin is our number 13. His ADP was 78.1, and he ended up ranked third amongst defensemen and 37th overall. He had a banger of a year, 15 goals, which was ninth, 58 assists, which was sixth, 204 shots on goal, 105 hits, 132 blocks, 32 power play points, which was fourth among defensemen. His IPP fluctuates quite a bit. But this year was actually lower than average at 47.4%. So, I mean, kind of interesting there. His shooting percentage similar to last year. On ice shooting percentage, highest of a career by far, which is not crazy. Buffalo has been shit for almost as long as Dahlin has been, for as long as Dahlin's been there, and this was by far their best year. So it's not surprising that their on ice shooting percentage was the highest of his career. And Buffalo scored a ton of goals this year. They were one of the highest scoring teams in the league. So 12.21%. That's not a crazy high number, but it's high for him. So that definitely explains a little bit of the number increase. He had nearly 2 minutes time on ice above his career high last year, which was the previous year, at 25 minutes 47 seconds, so that's tons of minutes. His shots per 60 was 26th in the league, individual Corsi 4 per 60 45th, individual scoring chances 4 per 60 19th, which was a career high for him, 4.26. There is not a ton of reason to think that he couldn't score 70 points again. That's kind of what I'm coming away with. Buffalo is on the rise. There's nothing to say that this was a flash in the pan for Dahlin. I think this is something that I mean he could be a top. I think probably a top 10 guy. You think top 3? Hey, interesting. So why don't you talk a little bit about why you think he's a top 3 guy? Because for me, I think the top 3 is clear cut. I think it's Cale Makar, Roman Josi, Dougie Hamilton. But what you give me your take on Dahlin here?
So the biggest thing that puts him into the 3 spot for me is that Buffalo is now a team to be reckoned with, and he has crossed the 300 game threshold now. It's wild to think this, right? But he is 23 years old, and this coming season will be his 6th season. Okay. He has, like you said, gotten almost a 2-minute bump from last season, and he got a 3-minute bump from the year before that. He is just now, this season, a positive plus-minus player. Okay? Just now. Like at one point in his career, negative 36 for a top-line player. They have been bad, and they are now good. and they are getting better, right? And they're getting better all over the ice. Like, he's got challengers on his defensive side now. And as much as I am down on Hamilton, I am down on Fox, I am down on the rest of that et al. List, I am that much higher on Dahlin. I think the sky is the absolute limit. I see 73 points as kind of a floor, honestly. I see him as a point per game player at a defenseman. And I think there's a real chance that we talk about him as a perennial top 3 defenseman going forward.
Yeah, I think that's within the realm of possibility for sure. All right. Who do you have at number 14? It's an interesting 14. Name.
Mac Weeks, Mackenzie Weegar, probably the longest name by letter in the league, even with all the Europeans. ADP 79.8 is ranked among defensemen, was 37th and 172 overall, with 4 goals, 27 assists, 160 shots on goal, 186 hits, and 117 blocks. He had only 3 power play points on a pretty dismal Flames power play. 73rd overall tied that left him. His IPP was actually way up from last year, going from 41.89 from 36. His shooting percentage was the lowest of his career at an ugly 2.5%, usually closer to 5%. Time on ice down by over 2 minutes. He hit 21.05. His shots per 60 and individual scoring chances 4 per 60 were also down from last year, but only by a hair. Shots per 60, 45th. Individual Corsi 4 per 60, 28th. And individual scoring chances 4 per 60, 41st. His on-ice shooting percentage, 7.49%, down from 10.6 last year. So that's kind of a given.
It's very notable.
When you grant the change of scenery and the way that they really underperform, that's kind of a given. His on-ice rate stats, similar to last year. Calgary just could not score, right? Could not score, even when they, in those off moments, relied on the people that were supposed to score for them. They could not score. He didn't get the power play time like we expected. They tried out a handful of different people and went with someone else. The underlying stats aren't too concerning for you. The ice time is. The new coach utilization of Weegar could be interesting. Are you expecting a return to form for Weegar, or are you placing all of the previous results on Florida and just kind of sweeping it under the rug this year? Or are you just hoping for things to be better for Weegar?
No, I think things will be better for Weegar. I don't know if he gets back to the numbers that he had in Florida, but I expect a better year overall for Calgary just because they're better than they just couldn't score last year. They couldn't score. They were producing a ton under the hood and just couldn't put the puck in the net. So I don't think that lasts. I think that they bounce back as a team. I think Mackenzie Weegar has a better year offensively. Obviously, with a new coach, the utilization is going to change completely, right? So maybe he gets a bit more power play time on power play 2. I think Rasmus Anderson is kind of solidified as their PP1 guy at this point. But that being said, their power play was not great. So maybe he gets a shot again. I don't know. We'll see. I'm certainly not that confident in that. I felt pretty good about it last year and it didn't happen.
Right.
So he did get power play time in Florida when Aaron Ekblad was out, and that was a big factor in terms of his point totals. But yeah, like you said, low shooting percentage for him, like half of what it normally is. And then his ice time went down. Maybe it goes up next year. We'll see. Yeah, I just think that, and then the on ice shooting percentage, 7.49. That's crazy. And part of that is not playing on the power play, but also like that's low in general for anyone. So that's got to improve. So I think that Uyghur has a better year, but absolutely not drafting him at this level, like 80th overall. That's crazy. Like I think he's a late round guy that you could potentially get some nice value for.
I think he is a stamped buy low candidate. Whether you draft him at great value or you look to pick him up early in the season at great value, I think there's a real chance of a rebound, but I don't really know what to expect, and we'll have to see and hear a lot more from Calgary to kind of flesh that out.
Yeah, for sure. All right, number 15, Shea Theodore. His ADP was 85.8. And his end of season rank was 55th among defensemen and 236 overall. He had 8 goals, 33 assists, 136 shots on goal, 16 hits, 86 blocks, 9 power play points. He only played 55 games, so that's huge. He was on a 12 goal pace, a 49 assist pace, 61 point pace, which would be a career high for him, and the highest shot block pace of his career. His IPP got a huge bump, 56.94%. It's typically in the high 40s, so that's a bit of a red flag. There may be some regression coming there, but his shooting percentage was pretty normal for him, 5.88%. He had the lowest time on ice since 2019 at 21:25, down a minute and a half from the previous year. So Bruce Cassidy maybe not as stoked about playing Shea Theodore as much as Pete DeBoer was. His shots per 60 were 10th. His individual Corsi 4 per 60 were 11th. His individual scoring chances 4 per 60 were 22nd. That's all fairly normal for him. Those numbers, they were all pretty normal. I think there's a little bit of luck putting him on this career high pace, despite the lower time on ice. Because typically, when you have a lower time on ice, you have like similar rate stats. Your numbers are probably going to go down, but then you see the IPP getting a bit of a bump. I think if you were to get an increased role, both at even strength and on the power play, he's an elite offensive defenseman. I think he's still waiting for that big breakout. Is it going to come? I don't know. I really would love to see him as that power play one quarterback, but they kind of split their power play up in terms of their forwards too in Vegas. So I don't know. I like Shea Theodore still. I still think I'm drafting him at that level, at like the 80, 85 range. Just because of the potential. But is he going to reach it? I'm not sure. What do you think, Binksy?
I honestly don't know what to think. They're so deep defensively that they don't need him to shoulder the load in any certain regard, whether it's defensively or offensively. They don't need him to shoulder the load in terms of power play usage. He is, well past that 300 game threshold for defensemen. I don't really know what to expect. He's incredibly consistent. So to see some of those stats be lower, I don't know. I don't know what to expect. And especially considering they had a smattering of injuries defensively for the Golden Knights this year. I'm really, really unclear about how I feel about Theodore as a whole, and even more so kind of versus the next person on our list.
Yeah, so the next person on our list, very appropriately, is Alex Pietrangelo, the guy that he's sharing power play time with. His ADP was 87.2. His rank at the end of the season was 11th among defensemen and 87th overall. Why don't you talk about some Pietrangelo stats here?
So 11 goals that left him tied for 21st, 43 assists, tied for 13th with 170 shots, 65 hits, and 177 blocks, with a total of 14 power play points that left him tied for 31st. He tied a career high in points with 54 in only 73 games, with 12 goals and a 48 assist pace, 60-point pace, elite shot blocker, as were most of the Golden Knights this year.
Yeah.
His IPP was 52%, a little high for him, but it tends to fluctuate a little bit. His shooting percentage, 6.47, is right in line with career averages. His on-ice shooting percentage was a touch high. He averaged just under 24 minutes a game, and the individual underlying stats took a dip with shots per 60 down over 1 from last year, individual Corsi 4 per 60 down nearly 2.5 from last year, and individual scoring chances for also down almost 1 from last year. So last year was a down year for him. The shots per 60 left him 34th. Individual Corsi 4 was 44th, and individual scoring chances for was 79th. He's showing some decline in individual underlying stats. It's possibly age-related, you think? Not showing in the point totals yet, but you're seeing some red flags here, huh?
So my initial thought was maybe it's age related, but it could just be a change in structure, like a change in structure, like coaching structure, and just the way that they're creating offense in Vegas, just with Bruce Cassidy as coach and the new coaching staff. I like Pietrangelo has typically been a pretty high volume shooter, and that's obviously gone down, like you mentioned. So, it could just be a change in strategy, not necessarily age related decline, but nonetheless, there is some decline there, and I think that there could be some slight negative regression in terms of points. Like I think this is probably the ceiling in terms of point production for Pietrangelo. But like he said, he's still an elite shot blocker. So the fact that he's got that offensive upside, the fact that they still are playing him on power play 1 a lot of the time, and then he's got that he bangs a little bit. I think he's still got some nice value. I think this is probably where you want to be drafting him, in like the 80s. I don't have a problem with this position for Pietrangelo. I don't know that he is perennially number 11 in terms of defenseman ranks, but I don't think he's that far off.
Okay.
Yeah.
I feel totally fine about that. I think all of those marks are fair.
Yeah. Okay. So number 17 is Brent Burns. So his ADP was 94.6. He ended up ranked 9th among defensemen and 71st overall. He had 18 goals, which was tied for 3rd among defensemen, 43 assists, which was tied for 13th, 255 shots, which was 3rd, 40 hits, 86 blocks, 23 power play points, which is 14th, 61 points overall. So Brent Burns is kind of back, isn't he? I mean, as we kind of expected, going to Carolina, where he didn't have to share power play time like the last couple of years with Erik Karlsson. His IPP was fairly average for him, 53.51%. His shooting percentage was the highest since 2017, which is 7.06%, but that's not unrealistic for him. It's not crazy high for Brent Burns. He's a pretty good goal scorer from the back end. His on-ice shooting percentage, super low, 9.53%, especially for a guy playing on the power play. Again, we talked about it before in the last podcast when we were talking about Sebastian Aho. Carolina produces a ton under the hood and doesn't convert a ton. And their power play was not great this year. So, so that's a pretty surprising number there. His individual rate stats kind of actually went up after a couple of down years in San Jose. His shots per 60 was 4th in the league with 8.04. Individual Corsi 4 per 60, 5th with 17.46. And his individual scoring chances 4 per 60 were 9th with 4.85. He had a massive bump in on-ice rate stats. And that's not super surprising going from San Jose to Carolina. But his Corsi 4/60 was 73.78. And that's up from 54.31. So that's almost a 20-point bump. And then scoring chances 4/60, 37.22, up from 29.14. And that's nearly the highest of his career. So Brent Burns in a way better situation than he was in San Jose the last few years. And obviously benefited from it a lot. He's back to being a top 10 defenseman. I think this is reasonable for Brent Burns, especially as he continues to quarterback that Carolina power play. I would hope that they improve next year. We'll see what kind of pieces they add. But I'm liking Brent Burns in the top 10.
So
what do you think?
Burns himself, I have the same expectations of for next year. The idea that Carolina kind of deserves to improve or is expected to improve doesn't really align with their rate metrics as a team. It's incredibly consistent over the last 4 years in terms of goals per 60, points per 60, expected goals per 60, shots per 60. Your Corsi score was a bit higher this year, but the other kind of like correlating per 60 metrics were all in line as well. So I'm concerned at the idea that Carolina deserves or should be better, and we can expect better things from their individual players as a whole. But kind of the inverse of Aho, where I don't really want to draft him at his consistency. Burns, I absolutely do want to draft him at his consistency. Like an ADP of 95 for this consistent of a player as a power play quarterback is phenomenal, and I'm all over it. I'm going to be pouncing on Burns probably a little bit earlier than that AVP.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, man. Who you got at 18?
Next up for us at 18 is Darnell Nurse. His ADP was 95.4, and his rank among defensemen was 12th, 88th overall. He had 12 goals, which left him tied for 17th. 31 assists, 203 shots, 146 hits, and 164 blocks. He had a solitary single power play point, which put him only 98th. So kind of better than you would think with only 1 point. He had 43 points for a career high. Amazing that 42 of them were at even strength. His IPP was highest of his career, 43%, typically in the mid-30s. I think we absolutely know how to attribute that. His shot percentage was 5.91%, so not unrealistic for him, not eye-popping and not really disappointing, just kind of expected. His ice time was down 23-29 from 25 minutes last year. His individual rates are very steady. The hit rates significantly down this year, and shots and blocks up. So obviously not a power play guy for them.
No.
Obviously super consistent. What do you think?
But maybe he is next year. Like I could see him quarterbacking PP2 next year. Not obviously not PP1, but I mean, how
Does
much
that
is
matter
PP2?
though?
Yeah, I was going to say how much is PP2 even going to play with that insane power play one? Yeah, I mean, I still like Darnell Nurse. I think he's got some upside. I think the fact that he hits and blocks, that's huge for him. He's a goal scoring defenseman, even without playing on the power play. And you've seen that the last few years. I mean, IPP is pretty high, so maybe you see some negative regression there. Shooting percentage isn't crazy. Ice time is down. Yeah, I mean, they're kind of forced to play him. They're not super stoked on Darnell Nurse right now. At least Edmonton Oilers fans aren't. I think just because of the money that he's making. I don't think he's a bad defenseman, but he definitely has fantasy value. Definitely, I think one of the higher value defensemen that doesn't play on the power play. But yeah, definitely like in the 10 to 15. Well, I would say 12 to 15 range in terms of ranking defensemen is where I put him.
Before we move on and hit on these last two people, do you see a possibility that Darnell Nurse is their power play quarterback next year?
No.
Is it even a thought process for you? Like, are you even in the back of your mind thinking this could explode and I get a power play quarterback for the Oilers and the Darnell Nurse that I get normally? Like, one power play point, is it even possible that he hits 10?
Well, I guess the one factor is if there's an injury to Evan Bouchard, I think he is their power play quarterback. That's the key. So maybe there is potential for something there if there's some injuries, but that you're banking on injuries at that point.
Can't do
so
that. Yeah,
and you can't do that. Yeah. So so I think he's moved up the depth chart in terms of inheriting the power play if something bad happens, but I think Evan Bouchard's their guy, and I think the way that he performed in the playoffs on that power play, like he was fantastic. So
really cemented that. Yeah.
I don't see that. I don't see them moving off of him. All right. Number 19, we're almost done. It was Noah Dobson. His ADP was 96.1, ended up ranked 20th among D and 117th overall. He had 13 goals, which is tied for 13th, 36 assists, 206 shots, 60 hits, 104 blocks, 19 power play points, which is tied for 18th. He had 49 points, which is down 2 from last year, so really not that much different. His on-ice shooting percentage was 9.72, so also super low. I mean, he plays for the Islanders, so I mean, and that was the year they had this year. They couldn't score. His IPP was 50%, shooting percentage 6.31. Both of them are down slightly from last year, but not by that much. His ice time is down by a minute, 2022. So that's kind of interesting. I don't really know what to say about that. But he had career highs in all individual rate stats, which is interesting. His shots per 60 were 8th in the league, 7.77. Individual Corsi 4 per 60 was 4th at 18.15. And his individual scoring chances 4 per 60 was 17th with 4.38. His on-ice rate stats actually had a huge bump as well. So that's interesting. The team played better with him on the ice than they did the previous year. So that's kind of interesting. He could be a value pick next year. I think his underlyings are among the best for defensemen. The only issue is he plays in Long Island, right? I think he has the potential to be a premium fantasy defenseman in the league. I mean, so much about defense production is who you're playing with, and there's just nothing in New York, unfortunately. So I'd like to be higher on Dobson, but I'm just not because of his team situation. What's your take, Binksy?
I like the prospectus. The Isles have gotten better as a team, and puck luck wise, production wise, they just should be a better team next year. They're going to get some gunners healthy. They've got premium talent brought in. It's really hard for me to be excited about a top level defenseman who is getting 20 to 21 minutes a night, right? Like, they're not relying on him, and it's just kind of weird. So I think there's a world where that jumps up a couple of minutes. He's still got 70 plus games to go to hit that 300 game threshold. It wouldn't surprise me if the coming season is not his breakout party, but the season after that, when the Isles continue to improve, continue to come together, if it's maybe a season too early to invest in him a little bit higher. But I think there's certainly usage with Dobson. I think there's like some viability there, but I don't have any high hopes for it to be like this like over the moon season where he jumps 10, 12, 15 ranks.
All right, Binksy, take us home with number 20. This is your boy. This is a good one for you.
Miro! I think we're going to need a Miro. Heiskanen, ADP 97.6. His rank among defensemen was 7th, 64th overall, which is intense. 11 goals left him tied for 21st. He had 62 assists, which placed him solidly in 3rd place. 206 points, 49 hits, 96 blocks, and 34 power points left him tied for a league lead. 73 points was career highs and nearly across the board. A huge bump in on-ice shooting percentage at 11.73, usually around 8%. Probably partially due to the power play one time. The IPP is way up, 52%, usually around 45%. The shooting percentage, 5.34, which is a realistic, achievable number for him. His time on ice bump was huge. 25-29 this year. He was constantly on the ice. I mean, constantly. And I mean, consistently double shifting and then going into a power play. Like he was always on the ice. Like you mentioned with the DeBoer to Cassidy transition, DeBoer absolutely relies on his best defenseman, and he is like overwhelmingly that. I have concerns about what happens with the Suter pairing, because Suter is hopefully, as a Stars fan, going to get bought out or demoted or something. Like he dragged the team and that pairing down in a bunch of ways. So my hope is that they, in the same way that they transition Miro to the number one defenseman in all facets of the game after moving on from Klingberg, my hope is that they pair Miro with one of the younger defensemen coming through the system, and that he becomes, not just in terms of time on ice, but in terms of focus on the ice, becomes that much more important. So it's finally the breakout that we hope for. There could be some negative regression, but Dallas has a really offensive team now, and he's the guy for the foreseeable future. I mean, he's a franchise player. He's locked in contractually. He is only going to get better, I think. I don't know how much better he can get, but he's only going to get better, right? There's no cliff for him to fall off. They're only going to give him more opportunity than this. And last year, going into the draft, I was concerned that he was such a good overall player that he might not have as big of an impact fantasy-wise. And he blew right through that glass ceiling this season. So I think there's a real possibility that it gets even better for Miro. And maybe that's just me as a Stars fan, but I think there's a real possibility that he jumps into that conversation of top 5 defensemen in the league.
Yeah, I don't think you're far off there. This was the coming out party that we all expected or hoped for Miro Heiskanen. Like he had shown, he's shown flashes of brilliance. He'd shown a lot under the hood, and just wasn't getting the opportunity with John Klingberg there on the power play. And now they just let him run, and he really stepped up to the plate. And I mean, there's nothing really that's too crazy. I guess the IPP was a little high, but yeah, I don't know. He's still so young too. Like that's the thing that everyone forgets, is he came into the league almost immediately, and he still has room to grow. So I'm excited for the prospects of Miro Heiskanen as a fantasy guy, and yeah, like potentially a top 5 defenseman. I don't think you're far off with that. I don't think that's your Stars fan bias at all. All right. Well, that is our top 20. In the future, we're going to do probably an episode about players that finished in the top 20 or the top 25 for forwards and defensemen at the end of the season that weren't initially in the top 20 or top 25 in ADP. And if those seasons are repeatable, we'll kind of analyze that. But yeah, we'll save that for a future episode. But that is all we have for today. If you like our content, check out the Apples and Genos Patreon. You can support the show on a monthly basis and get extra perks in season, including access to the Apples and Genos Patron League and an extra weekly waiver wire articles. Wow, that's a mouthful. And podcasts from Nate. There's a temporary off-season tier for only $2 a month where you can get early access to Nate's projections as he makes them. So you're going to want to check that out. Hop into the Apples and Genos Discord server. Shout outs to the band there for providing our music. Their Spotify link is in the episode description. Give us a rating on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Follow us on Twitter. Binksy is at Binkomania. Nate is at Apples Genos. Blake is at Blake Creamer SE. And I'm at Just Josh and 41. Please practice safe stats and happy summer. Have a good one, folks.
Goodbye, everybody.